Okay, so here is my wonderful, very fun Beowulf project. So, yeah. Okay, first of all, for the plot of the story, I decided to go with very traditional plot line, starts with introduction, exposition, goes to rising action, conflict, climax, and the falling action, and the conclusion. So, what I thought that the introduction or initial situation was when King Hrothgar and the Danes were at the mercy of the marauding demon, Grendel, who kept on attacking their hall. So none of the king's soldiers were able to take down the demon, even with all their weapons. The Danes were completely helpless until Beowulf appeared. So, reason why I thought that that was the initial situation was because it was what happened at the beginning, and it was also just like nothing was happening until Beowulf, the main character, appeared. So next thing in it was the conflict. So that I thought that that would be when Beowulf appeared, threw his armor and weapons aside, and he decided to start fighting the demon in a wrestling match to the death. So that was obviously the conflict to me. So, like, a demon and a warrior fighting in hand-to-hand combat to the death is very obviously a conflict. It's basically a trend that I noticed in Beowulf. Like, the story is not very good at being subtle about which part of the plot it is at, or which of whether the characters represent the good or the evil. If there's a demon, he's obviously evil. If there's a buff warrior guy who manages to defeat the demon without an armor or weapons, he has to be the guy that is the good guy. Then, as soon as you think that all of the conflict is over, the demon's mother shows up and is very irritated at the fact that the Geat warrior just showed up and managed to kill her son. So she tries to get revenge, and Beowulf kills her as well. So, obviously, in the plot, there was kind of this place where nothing really important happened. It was the 50 years between Beowulf fighting the demons, and then he became the king in that period of time when Hygelac, the king, and Beowulf's previous foster brother, died in battle. So Hygelac is considered to be a good guy. He was very honorable, died in battle, which is the best way to die according to this culture. But after he died, Beowulf became the king of the Gates, and he reigned for his 50 years. So when he heard about this dragon, Beowulf, he thought that he might die fighting it. I mean, he was 70-ish, probably older, so it made sense that he would die fighting it. But 50 years later, he decides to go fight the dragon, which is obviously the climax. So the dragon has been terrorizing his people, and as king, it is up to him to get rid of it. So he hasn't had a huge battle with a terrifying monster in over 50 years, and this one is the worst monster that he's ever fought. So huge battle scene. It's kind of obvious that it's coming, and so this story, Beowulf, it is not good at being subtle once again. So before he actually fights the dragon, it has the suspense. So this isn't the most fun part of the book. It got kind of boring when Beowulf was talking to himself for hundreds of lines all about his amazing victories and achievements, instead of actually going to the dragon's burrow and killing the dragon. So, although a bit of suspense can be great for a story, this was just too much and kind of got boring. So, fights the dragon, kills the dragon, but he managed to kill it and take his treasure, but he gets mortally wounded in the process, which could be considered a Pyrrhic victory, one in which you technically win and should be proud of, but you've lost so much in the process of winning that it's impossible to actually be happy with what you've won. This is, after this, it's the falling action or the denouement, because the protagonist is now dead and there isn't going to be a replacement. And after Beowulf dies, you know that the story's going to end soon. I mean, it's named after him. It can't keep on going after he's dead. So then there's the conclusion, where it ends with a funeral pyre for Beowulf. He's greatly honored for his brave death and is considered to be a great hero, but the unfortunate fact is that he's still dead. So the Gates now are preparing for war as their neighbors get ready to invade their area. And that is it for the plot of this wonderful story. So now I'm going to talk about the cultural significance of Beowulf in our literature. Although it was written and recited in Britain, Beowulf was about Scandinavian characters. They were mostly Danish and Swedish. So experts are generally think that it's because the early Anglo-Saxons, the Britons, were descendants of Germanic and Scandinavian peoples that invaded Britain in about the 5th century. So because of this, there was a lot of shared cultural ancestry between the Anglo-Saxons and the Scandinavians, and the Anglo-Saxons could trace their ancestry back to Scandinavian countries. So, but then it's not just a story about one place, about that is told in one place about a different place. It's told in one time about a different time. Like if we told stories today about the Middle Ages. So this time that the poem was recited, about the 8th to 11th century, they're not completely sure. The Britain was already Christianized, and Christianity was the general religion. But the culture that Beowulf talks about was more pagan, which must have been multiple centuries before it was told. So, at one point during the 8th or 11th centuries, when Beowulf was being told, somebody wrote it down in a manuscript that is called the Noble Codex, but nobody really knew about it until 1815. It was almost destroyed a couple times, and we almost lost this piece of literature. So it's considered to be the first English epic ever written, but Old English, Modern English, or Middle English are completely different languages. They aren't even remotely similar. If you are able to, like, if you want to learn if you want to be able to read Old English, you have to take second language classes in Old English because there are barely any similarities. So I took a little piece of actual Beowulf in Old English and transliterated it, which means that I took it from its letters in Old English and put it into our letters in Modern English. So I'll put the original Old English version in my comments, but basically if you're speaking it, and this is horrible, but I think I have the general idea, it's like Selrebieth at quorum that he his threon drake Donne e fela morne, or outwut, cael ende gebedan, or rode leifes, worke se temote, domes ardai, that bieth drit guman, un lief gen dem after se leist. Not recognizable as English, and yet it is Old English. So that passage meant, better is it for each one of us that he should avenge his friend than greatly mourn. Each of us must expect an end of living in this world. Let him who may win glory before death, for that is best at last for the departed warrior. There is no way that if you heard that version, the Old English version, that you would ever get to the Modern English version without having a lot of background in this general area. But there are a couple of similarities, like in the Old English version it says Freyond, which means friend, and then there's Morne, which means mourn, Deyayat, which is death, but majority of it isn't even recognizable. So the final part of this is talking about the heroes, the monsters, and the struggle between good and evil in both modern day and in Beowulf literature. So first, starting with the heroes. The hero in Beowulf is obviously Beowulf, and he's a classic strong hero that unfortunately suffers a Pyrrhic victory near the end of the story, where he wins the battle against the dragon and gets all the treasure, but he is mortally wounded and loses his life. He is strong, he's brave, and he's honorable, and he happens to even have been a foster brother to the King of the Gates. He basically has everything in life going for him. So, although this is great for a story or a fairy tale, it isn't nearly as likely to happen in real life. Actually, it's almost impossible to have somebody as perfect as Beowulf in real life. For this reason, few heroes like him actually exist in literature today. Every hero needs to have their weakness, their fatal flaw, or their Achilles heel. The main flaw that Beowulf has is his pride. Even though he was obviously too old to still be fighting horrible monsters, he still thought that he could do it. Like, he fought the dragon 50 years after he defeated Grendel, so he must have been in his 70s or 80s at this point, which back in the Old English, um, back in these ancient times, that was a really, really old age. Characters in literature today have more flaws than that, more flaws than just pride, mostly because people that actually exist have many flaws, and people try to make their characters as realistic as they possibly can these days. The next section is the monsters. So the monsters in Beowulf are the traditional scary monsters, like a demon and his mother, as well as a fire-breathing dragon. These seem to be the same as the classic monsters that are in children's books and stories, not just now, but throughout all of history. Since the beginning of time, people have made up stories to explain things that go bump in the night. The story just takes it a step further and lets the monsters embody true evil, which the protagonist must fight in order to restore peace to his land. Literature today, monsters aren't usually actually monsters unless it's in fantasy. Writers will often now write about people, like actual human people, that are horrible and could be considered monsters, but they definitely do not breathe fire, have powers, or anything like that. Another reason for this is because most people today are fairly certain that there are no such things as dragons, so they only exist in fantasy. Back when Beowulf was written, the world was mostly unexplored, so people actually thought that dragons and demons and monsters could exist. This is another example of modern-day writers making stories more realistic. And finally, the struggle between good and evil. In this story, it is pretty easy to tell who is good and who is evil. The reason that this is easy is because the evil is represented by literal monsters, such as Grendel and his mother, the dragon, which, the epitome of good, Beowulf, is fighting and kills. The king of the gates, who dies in the most honorable way possible in battle. Like, he's considered a good guy. Another good character is Beowulf himself. He comes to power through his great deeds in his honor. Literature today is not nearly as easy to tell who is good and who is bad, mostly because we do not have the same ideas of honor that people follow. In Beowulf's time, you either had honor or you didn't. This made it a lot easier to tell who was honorable and who wasn't. Now the lines are a lot more blurry about what is good and what is bad. Back in the time of Beowulf, good characters didn't have bad characteristics, and bad characters didn't have good characteristics. This is very different in current literature because people try to make their characters, again, realistic. So that's the end of my presentation. I hope you enjoyed. Yay!